My name is Nellie, and I'm 57 years old. Last week was my birthday, and I thought it would be a day of celebration with my family. Instead, it became the day my son threw my birthday cake on the floor and told me to eat it like the pathetic old woman I was. But what happened the next morning changed everything. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever felt completely invisible in your own family, hit that like button. Trust me, this story will show you that silence can be the most powerful weapon of all. I've been a widow for 12 years now, ever since my husband passed away from a sudden heart attack. Those early years were tough, but I threw myself into work at the insurance company where I've been employed for nearly 30 years. I climbed my way up from a secretary to a senior claims adjuster, and I was proud of what I'd accomplished on my own. My son Jason was 26 when his father died, and losing his dad hit him hard. I watched him struggle through those first couple of years, but gradually he seemed to find his footing again. When he met Madison at a friend's wedding 3 years ago, I was thrilled to see him smile again. She was a bubbly 25-year-old with blonde hair and bright blue eyes who seemed to adore my son. When they got engaged after just 8 months of dating, I was over the moon. Jason brought Madison to dinner at my small 2-bedroom apartment, and she gushed about how cozy it was. She talked about wanting a big family someday, and I felt my heart swell with the possibility of grandchildren. That's when Jason dropped the bombshell. He and Madison were looking at houses, but the mortgage rates were killing them. They'd been living in his cramped studio apartment, and Madison was desperate for more space. I watched the worry lines crease his forehead as he explained their financial situation. Without hesitation, I made a decision that would change all our lives. I sold my little apartment and used the proceeds combined with my savings to put a down payment on a beautiful 4-bedroom house in the suburbs. It had a big backyard perfect for the children they planned to have. The house was in my name, but I told them they could live there rent-free. All I asked was that they help with utilities and groceries. The gratitude in Jason's eyes made every sacrifice feel worth it. Madison threw her arms around me and called me the best mother-in-law in the world. We spent weekends furniture shopping together, picking out everything from kitchen appliances to bedroom sets. For the first time since my husband died, I felt like I was part of a real family again. The first few months were wonderful. Madison would ask my advice about decorating, and Jason would come home from his job at the auto parts store excited to work on little projects around the house. We'd have dinner together most nights, and I felt useful again, cooking for people I loved. But looking back now, I can see the subtle changes that started creeping in around the 6-month mark. Little things at first, like Madison mentioning how her friends' mothers-in-law didn't live with them, or Jason suggesting that I might be more comfortable with my own space in the basement, which we could fix up nicely. I brushed off these comments because I wanted so desperately for everything to work out. I'd already given up my independent life, my own space, my sense of autonomy. The thought of starting over again at 54 felt overwhelming. So I convinced myself that these were just growing pains, the natural adjustment period of 3 adults learning to share a home. The shift from being treated like family to being treated like an unwelcome guest happened gradually, so gradually that I almost didn't notice it at first. It started with small requests that seemed reasonable enough. Madison would ask if I could do a load of laundry since I was already doing mine. Could I pick up a few things at the grocery store while I was out? Would I mind cleaning the guest bathroom since I used it too? But these requests quickly multiplied and became expectations. I'd come home from a long day at work to find a sink full of dishes that had been sitting there since morning. When I'd mention it, Madison would sigh and say she'd been so busy all day even though she didn't have a job. Jason had encouraged her to quit her part-time position at the clothing store when they moved in, saying he wanted to take care of her. The dinner table conversations changed too. Instead of asking about my day or sharing stories about theirs, Jason and Madison would discuss plans that didn't include me. They'd talk about weekend trips they were planning, restaurants they wanted to try, friends they were meeting up with. When I'd ask if I could join them sometimes, Madison would say things like, "Oh, we figured you'd want to relax at home," or, "It's really more of a young crowd." I started feeling like a stranger in what was supposed to be my own home. They'd rearrange furniture without asking me. Madison would use my good china for her friends when they came over, but when I suggested we use it for family dinners, she'd say it was too fancy for everyday use. She started referring to the house as their place when talking to others, conveniently forgetting that my name was on the deed. The financial boundaries began to blur around this time too. Madison mentioned that it would be Convenient if she could get a credit card linked to my account just for emergencies and household expenses. Jason backed her up, saying it would make things easier for everyone. He promised they'd keep track of all purchases and pay me back every month. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The first month, the bill was reasonable, mainly groceries and gas, but by the second month, I was looking at charges for expensive makeup clothes and dinners out. When I brought it up with Jason, he got defensive and said Madison was going through a stressful time adjusting to being unemployed. He promised it wouldn't happen again. But it did happen again. And again. Each month, the bills got higher, and each month, Jason had a new excuse. Madison needed professional clothes for job interviews. She was depressed about not finding work, and retail therapy helped. They'd pay me back as soon as Jason got his next bonus. The excuses kept coming, but the payments never did. I started to feel like I was financing their lifestyle while being treated like hired help in my own home. But I told myself this was temporary, that things would get better once Madison found a job and they got more settled. I loved my son, and I wanted his marriage to work. If supporting them financially for a while was what it took, I was willing to do it. What I wasn't prepared for was how much worse things were about to get. The real turning point came 6 months later when Madison announced she was pregnant. I was thrilled at the prospect of becoming a grandmother, and I assumed this news would bring us closer together as a family. Instead, it became the catalyst for Jason and Madison to start treating me like an obstacle to their happiness. Within a week of the pregnancy announcement, Madison was making plans for the nursery, but instead of asking to use the smallest bedroom, which would have made sense, she decided they needed the master bedroom I'd been sleeping in. Her reasoning was that the master had the attached bathroom, which would be convenient for nighttime feedings and diaper changes. Jason approached me nervously one evening, clearly uncomfortable with the request, but committed to backing his wife. He explained that they'd really appreciate it if I could move my things to the small bedroom down the hall. It would just be temporary, he assured me, until they could afford their own place. The small bedroom barely fit a twin bed and a dresser. It had one tiny window that faced the neighbor's brick wall and no closet to speak of. I'd gone from having my own apartment to having my own bedroom to being relegated to what was essentially a large closet, but I swallowed my pride and agreed, telling myself that sacrifices were part of being a good mother and grandmother. But moving bedrooms was just the beginning. Madison suddenly had opinions about everything in the house. The living room furniture was too old-fashioned and needed to be replaced with something more modern and baby-friendly. The kitchen needed to be updated with child safety latches and outlet covers. The whole house needed to be repainted in more calming, neutral colors. I watched in stunned silence as they began making these changes without consulting me or asking for my input. Madison would spend entire days online shopping using the credit card linked to my account to order new furniture paint and decorations. When the credit card bills started reaching $15,000, I knew I had to put my foot down. I asked Jason to sit down with me for a serious conversation about money. I showed him the statements and explained that my salary couldn't support this level of spending indefinitely. I wasn't angry. I said I just needed them to help me understand how we could make this work long term. Jason's response shocked me. Instead of apologizing or promising to cut back, he became defensive and angry. He accused me of being selfish and not caring about his growing family. He said Madison was carrying his child and deserved to feel comfortable and happy in her home. When I reminded him that it was legally my home, his face went cold. "You have plenty of money, Mom," he said. "You've been saving for decades, and it's not like you have anything else to spend it on. Can't you just be happy that we're building something beautiful here?" The dismissive way he said, "It's not like you have anything else to spend it on," cut deep. As if my life, my future, my security didn't matter because I was older and didn't have the same dreams they did. But I bit my tongue and tried to find a compromise. That compromise lasted exactly 3 days. Madison decided the living room paint color wasn't quite right and ordered the painters to come back and redo everything. She bought a $1,000 crib that wouldn't even be needed for months. She started talking about hiring a housekeeper because pregnancy was making her too tired to clean. I realized with growing dread that there was no bottom to their spending and no end to their sense of entitlement. But I still believed that somewhere inside my son was the caring, responsible man I'd raised. I just needed to be patient until he found his way back to being that person. As Madison's pregnancy progressed, my status in the household continued to decline. What had started as being treated like an unwelcome roommate evolved into being treated like unpaid household staff. Madison would leave dirty dishes in the sink for days, then act put upon when I'd finally washed them myself. She'd track mud through the house in her shoes and expect me to clean it up. The social isolation was almost as painful as the financial drain. Madison had convinced Jason that they needed more privacy as a couple, especially with a baby coming. My longtime friends were no longer welcome to visit the house. When my coworker Sandra wanted to stop by to see the nursery preparations, Madison told me it wouldn't be convenient because they were having their own friends over that same evening. I started to feel like a prisoner in what had once been my sanctuary. I couldn't have people over, couldn't make changes to the common areas, couldn't even choose what to watch on television in the evenings. Madison had strong opinions about everything, and Jason supported her unconditionally. If I objected to anything, I was being difficult and unsupportive of their growing family. The final blow came during Thanksgiving. I'd been looking forward to hosting my first holiday in the new house, imagining a cozy family dinner with maybe a few friends. I spent days planning the menu and bought groceries for a feast. But 3 days before Thanksgiving, Jason casually mentioned that he and Madison would be spending the holiday with her parents instead. "It's important for Madison to be with her family during her pregnancy," he explained, as if I wasn't his family too. "Her mom wants to make sure she's eating well and not overdoing it." They left on Thanksgiving morning while I was getting ready to start cooking, taking the expensive wine I'd bought for our dinner and leaving me alone with a house full of groceries and no one to share them with. I spent Thanksgiving Day eating a sandwich and watching old movies, feeling more isolated and forgotten than I had since the dark days right after my husband's death. That weekend, something inside me shifted. I started paying closer attention to the financial statements that came in the mail. I began quietly researching property law and tenants' rights. I called my insurance company's legal department and asked some hypothetical questions about property ownership and family relationships. What I learned was both empowering and terrifying. The house was entirely in my name, which meant I had the legal right to sell it, or require anyone living there to pay rent or move out. But I also learned that if Jason and Madison could prove they'd been living there for an extended period and contributing to the household, they might have some claim to tenants' rights. I started documenting everything. I took photos of the credit card statements. I kept receipts showing that I was paying for all the utilities, property taxes, and maintenance. I made notes about the improvements they'd made using my money and their claims that the house belonged to them. But even as I was gathering this information, I held on to hope that things could still work out. My birthday was coming up in 3 weeks, and I thought maybe that could be a turning point. A celebration where we could reconnect as a family and find our way back to loving each other. I couldn't have been more wrong about what my birthday would bring. As my 57th birthday approached, I found myself feeling cautiously optimistic for the first time in months. Birthdays had always been special in our family. My husband used to make a big fuss every year, and Jason had continued that tradition even after his father died. Surely, I thought my birthday would remind Jason of who we used to be to each other. I decided not to leave anything to chance. 3 days before my birthday, I went to the bakery and ordered a beautiful chocolate cake with vanilla buttercream, the same kind we'd always had for family celebrations. I planned a nice dinner with all of Jason's favorite foods, thinking that maybe good food and the familiar comfort of family traditions would help us reconnect. Madison was about 4 months pregnant at this point and using her condition to avoid any household responsibilities. She spent most of her time on the couch watching television and ordering things online. When I mentioned that my birthday was coming up, she looked at me with barely concealed irritation. "Seriously," she said, "you're making a big deal about your birthday. You're almost 60, isn't that kind of pathetic?" Jason, who was sitting next to her, didn't defend me or correct her. He just shrugged and said, "Mom, maybe we could just do something low-key this year. Madison's been really tired lately." But I pressed on with my plans anyway. I took the day off work, which I rarely did, and spent the morning cleaning the house and preparing for the evening. I set the dining room table with my good china and cloth napkins. I cooked Jason's favorite pot roast with all the vegetables he loved as a child. I even bought a bottle of sparkling cider since Madison couldn't drink wine. The afternoon passed slowly. Madison stayed in her pajamas all day, complaining about morning sickness, even though it was well past noon. Jason got home from work at his usual time, but barely acknowledged that it was my birthday. No card, no flowers, no "Happy Birthday, Mom." I tried to keep my spirits up as I called them to dinner. I'd arranged everything beautifully and the food smelled amazing. But when they came to the table, Madison wrinkled her nose and said the smell was making her nauseous. Jason asked if we could just order pizza instead. My heart sank, but I forced a smile and said that was fine. I put away all the food I'd spent hours preparing and called for pizza delivery. We sat at my carefully set table eating lukewarm pizza from cardboard boxes while Madison complained about the grease and Jason scrolled through his phone. After dinner, I went to get the birthday cake. I'd been looking forward to this moment all day, imagining us laughing together over cake and maybe sharing some good memories. I walked into the kitchen, lit the candles, and carried the cake into the dining room with a hopeful smile. "Happy birthday to me," I said softly since no one else seemed inclined to sing. That's when everything fell apart. Madison looked at the cake with disgust and said, "Who cares about your stupid birthday? You're not a child. Why are you being so desperate for attention?" I felt my face flush with embarrassment and hurt, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "It's just a tradition," I said. "I thought we could share something nice together." That's when Jason stood up abruptly, his face twisted with an anger I'd never seen before. "You know what, Mom? I'm sick of this. I'm sick of you constantly trying to insert yourself into our lives. Can't you see we don't want to celebrate with you?" Before I could respond, he reached across the table and shoved the cake hard, sending it flying off the table and onto the floor. The beautiful chocolate cake exploded in a mess of frosting and crumbs all over my clean kitchen tiles. "There's your birthday cake, Mom," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Why don't you eat it off the floor like the pathetic old woman you are?" Madison started laughing, a cruel sound that cut through me like a knife. "Yeah," she added, "maybe now you'll learn to stop bothering us with your desperate need for attention." I stood there in the doorway looking at my destroyed birthday cake and feeling something inside me break and rebuild at the same time. But instead of crying or arguing or begging them to take back their words, I did something that surprised even me. I said absolutely nothing. I walked calmly to the closet, got out the dustpan and broom, and began cleaning up the mess. Jason and Madison watched me for a moment, seeming almost disappointed that I wasn't crying or screaming. Then they shrugged and went back to the living room to watch television. As I swept up the last of the cake crumbs, I felt a strange sense of clarity wash over me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt anymore. I was just done. That night, after Jason and Madison had gone to bed, I sat at my kitchen table and made a series of phone calls that would change everything. I didn't sleep at all that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my laptop, methodically working through a plan I'd been unconsciously preparing for weeks. The first call I made was to my bank using their 24-hour customer service line. "I need to report my credit cards as stolen," I told the representative, giving her the account numbers for the cards Jason and Madison had been using. "Were the physical cards taken from you, ma'am?" she asked. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "They were taken by someone I trusted, and I need them canceled immediately." Within minutes, both cards were deactivated. I then requested that all funds from our joint checking account be transferred to my personal savings account that only I had access to. The representative was helpful and efficient, noting that since I was the primary account holder, I had every right to make these changes. My next call was to my lawyer, Patricia, who I'd worked with when my husband died. I'd called her a few weeks earlier with some hypothetical questions about property rights, so she wasn't completely surprised to hear from me. "Patricia, I need to serve eviction papers to some tenants who have been living in my house without paying rent," I said. "How long have they been there?" she asked. "About 3 years, but they've never paid rent or had a formal lease agreement. They've been there at my sufferance, and now I'm withdrawing that sufferance." Patricia explained that since Jason and Madison had been living there without a lease and without paying rent, they were considered tenants at will under state law. I could terminate their tenancy with 30 days written notice, and if they refused to leave, I could file for formal eviction. "I can have the papers drawn up and served by tomorrow afternoon," she said. "Are you sure about this, Nellie? This seems like a family situation." "It was a family situation," I replied. "Now it's a business decision." My third call was to a real estate agent I'd been quietly researching. Despite the late hour, I left a detailed voicemail explaining that I needed to put my house on the market as soon as possible and would like to schedule a consultation for the next day. Finally, I called my boss and left a message that I would be taking a personal day. After 30 years with the company, I had plenty of vacation days saved up, and I was going to need them for what came next. As the sun came up, I heard Jason and Madison starting to move around upstairs. I made myself breakfast and sat at the table reading the newspaper, waiting for them to discover what had happened overnight. Madison was the first to figure it out. I heard her shriek from upstairs and then the sound of rapid footsteps as she ran down to the kitchen, still in her pajamas and slippers. "The credit card isn't working," she said, holding her phone and looking panicked. "I was trying to order maternity clothes online and it says the card was declined. Probably just a computer glitch," I said mildly, not looking up from my newspaper. "You should call the bank." Jason appeared a few minutes later, looking concerned. "Mom Madison says there's something wrong with the credit cards, and I tried to check our checking account balance, but it says the account is unavailable." I folded my newspaper carefully and looked at both of them standing in my kitchen in their pajamas, looking confused and frightened. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. "There's nothing wrong with the cards," I said calmly. "I canceled them last night, and I moved the money from our joint account into my personal savings." The silence that followed was deafening. Madison's mouth literally fell open, and Jason stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. "You can't do that," Madison finally sputtered. "That's our money too. We live here." "Actually," I said, standing up and walking to the counter where I'd laid out the eviction papers Patricia had faxed over that morning, "you don't live here anymore." I handed Jason the official documents, watching his face go pale as he read the legal language. "This is a formal notice to quit," I explained using the legal terminology Patricia had coached me on. "You have 30 days to find alternative housing and remove all of your belongings from my property." "You can't evict your own son," Jason said, his voice shaking with disbelief and growing anger. "I can evict anyone who lives in my house without paying rent," I replied. "You've been here for 3 years without contributing a penny to the mortgage, property taxes, or maintenance. You've run up over $15,000 in debt on my credit cards without any plan to pay it back. And last night, you made it very clear how little you think of me." Madison started crying big, dramatic sobs that might have moved me a week ago. "But I'm pregnant," she wailed. "You can't throw out a pregnant woman." "I'm not throwing anyone out," I said. "I'm giving you 30 days to make other arrangements. That's more than generous, considering how you've treated me." Jason crushed the eviction papers in his fist and slammed them down on the counter. "This is insane," he shouted. "You're my mother. Family doesn't do this to each other." I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, and felt a cold calm settle over me. "You're absolutely right," I said. "Family doesn't do this to each other. Family doesn't treat each other the way you've treated me. Family doesn't throw birthday cakes on the floor and call each other pathetic old women. So, I guess we're not family anymore. Bye." The next 30 days passed in a blur of activity and surprising revelations. Jason and Madison alternated between fury denial and desperate attempts at reconciliation. They tried every manipulation tactic they could think of, from tears to threats to promises of change. Madison spent the first week crying constantly and calling me heartless for evicting a pregnant woman. She had Jason call his father's sister, trying to get family members to pressure me into changing my mind. But my sister-in-law surprised me by being completely supportive of my decision. "It's about time," she told me over the phone. "I've been watching them take advantage of you for years and wondering when you'd finally stand up for yourself." Jason tried a different approach, appealing to my love for him and our shared memories. He brought up Christmas mornings from his childhood family vacations, the way I'd taken care of him when his father died. He promised that things would be different if I just gave them another chance. "I know we messed up, Mom," he said during one of our last real conversations. "But we're family. We can work through this." "We could have worked through it," I replied. "We could have worked through it when I asked you to help with the credit card bills. We could have worked through it when I asked for basic respect in my own home. We could have worked through it before you threw my birthday cake on the floor and called me pathetic." The practical aspects of their departure were complicated by the fact that they'd spent 3 years acquiring furniture and possessions while living rent-free. Madison insisted that everything they'd bought with their money belonged to them conveniently, forgetting that all their money had come from my credit cards or my bank account. I worked with Patricia to sort through what they could legally take. Anything they'd owned before moving in was clearly theirs. Anything bought with my credit cards belonged to me. Anything they could prove they'd purchased with Jason's paychecks could go with them. It was a messy process, but it forced a reckoning with just how much of their lifestyle I'd been financing. The expensive furniture, the designer clothes, the electronics, the artwork they'd bought to decorate what they called their home. Most of it had been purchased with my money, and most of it would be staying with me. As their moving day approached, I found myself feeling lighter and more hopeful than I had in years. I contacted the real estate agent and put the house on the market. With its updated kitchen, fresh paint, and modern furniture, it showed beautifully. I had an offer within 2 weeks. The hardest part was watching Jason load his pickup truck with the few belongings they were legally entitled to take. He looked so young and lost, and for a moment I wanted to run out there and tell him everything could go back to the way it was before. But then I remembered the way he'd looked at me when he pushed that cake onto the floor. I remembered Madison's cruel laughter. I remembered all the nights I'd felt invisible and unwanted in my own home. Instead of running to him, I watched from my bedroom window as they drove away to start their new life in Madison's parents' basement. Jason had found a second job to help pay for the credit card debt they'd inherited, and Madison had finally been forced to look for employment. A week later, the house sale was finalized. After paying off the mortgage and settling some debts, I had more money in my bank account than I'd ever had in my life. More importantly, I had something I'd almost forgotten existed. I had my freedom back. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my new apartment overlooking the city center, sipping my morning coffee and watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. This one-bedroom apartment is smaller than the house I owned, but every inch of it belongs to me. I choose the paint colors, the furniture, the decorations. I eat what I want when I want, watch whatever I feel like watching, and invite over whoever I choose. The transition wasn't always easy. The first few weeks after Jason and Madison moved out, I felt moments of crushing loneliness and doubt. Had I made the right choice? Was I being too harsh? Would I regret this decision for the rest of my life? But as the days passed, I rediscovered parts of myself that I'd lost somewhere along the way. I joined a book club at the local library and made friends with women who shared my love of mystery novels. I started taking cooking classes, learning to make cuisines I'd always been curious about but never had time to explore. I even started dating again, something I hadn't done since my husband died. His name is Robert, and he's a 62-year-old widower I met at a community volunteer event. He makes me laugh, treats me with kindness and respect, and never once makes me feel like my thoughts or feelings don't matter. We're taking things slowly, but for the first time in years, I'm excited about what the future might hold. Jason has called me a few times over these past months. The first few calls were angry and accusatory, filled with blame and resentment. But the most recent call was different. His voice was quieter, more thoughtful. He told me that he and Madison were struggling financially and that their relationship was strained. Living with her parents had been humbling, and having to work 2 jobs to pay off debt had been a wake-up call. "I think I'm starting to understand why you did what you did," he said during our last conversation. "I don't like it, and I'm still angry about it, but I think I understand." I didn't apologize or express regret because I don't feel either of those things, but I did tell him that I love him and that I hope he learns from this experience. I also told him that if he and Madison ever want to have a relationship with me based on mutual respect and genuine affection, I'm open to that conversation. Whether that happens or not is up to them. I'm no longer willing to accept crumbs of affection or tolerate disrespect in exchange for financial support. I've learned that loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing your dignity or your well-being for their comfort. The most surprising discovery of this whole experience has been how much life I still have left to live. At 57, I'm not winding down or settling for whatever scraps of happiness come my way. I'm building a new life based on my own choices and my own values. I may never be a grandmother, which saddens me sometimes when I see families with young children in the park. But I refuse to stay trapped in a toxic situation just for the possibility of access to future grandchildren who might be turned against me anyway. Instead, I'm choosing to invest in relationships that nourish me, activities that challenge me, and a future that excites me. I'm volunteering with literacy programs, tutoring adults who are learning to read. I'm planning a trip to Europe next spring, something I always wanted to do but never felt free to pursue. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is letting them face the consequences of their actions, and sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is choosing your own worth over their comfort. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family or taken for granted by people who should love you, I want you to know that it's never too late to choose yourself. Share this story if you know someone who needs to hear that message. Leave a comment and tell me about a time when you had to make a difficult choice to protect your own well-being. Don't forget to hit that like button if this story resonated with you and subscribe for more real life stories about finding strength in unexpected places. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that you deserve to be treated with respect and kindness, especially by the people who claim to love you. Your worth isn't determined by what you can give others, it's inherent in who you are.